Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Alex Suber, and this is the Beyond Sundays podcast. Welcome to the episode. We're so thankful you clicked on it, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on our app or your favorite podcast platform. Today, I'm joined by Pastor Jeremy Tyner, the pastor, the Reverend. We're both wearing black T-shirts. We've been talking for an hour, and I just noticed that. But we're so glad to have you. This is actually your first time on,
yes, yeah.
which is sad, and I kind of feel like that's on me, but you're here now, so I'm excited just to dive into the conversation. You preached this past Sunday at Oasis, and to kind of set up for those that are watching or listening that maybe haven't been following along, and as always, make sure you go listen to the actual sermon. It's phenomenal. This is kind of an addition to, but we've been in this season at Oasis where we've been talking a lot about miracles, about the difference between a miracle and a healing, and Dad's been teaching a lot on Wednesday nights, and so this Sunday it was kind of a standalone. We weren't really necessarily in a series or anything, and so we were like, hey, go for it. So why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit about, your thinking and kind of some of what you were feeling and what you shared, and we'll just dive into it.
I think at first my main goal was to make sure that I don't burn the house down. As far as anytime there's not a single Suber in church, I'm like,
so Dad and I were both gone preaching elsewhere. For those that don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, it was pretty cool that you guys trust me with that. And at the same time, though, I told Pastor Cliff, I'm like, we just got to make sure that whatever we do, that we don't end up on church milk, or we don't do something,
or at least clean it up before we get back. Like when you're a kid, like you destroy the house, and then before Mom and Dad get back, you gotta clean it all up.
That's exactly what it was that. So it was a great Sunday overall, and so we definitely led into the miracles and talked about the difference between miracles and healings. Mm-hmm. I think we kind of get that confused, and one thing I really wanted to press into was the fact that healings, are guaranteed, as far as we can be healed, instantaneously, eventually, or, obviously eventually, but, gradually.
Right.
But miracles, I really want to focus on the miracles and the reason why miracles don't happen. And I discovered a sequence with Christ when he, in John chapter 6, when he was, when he fed the multitude. And I read that, and I'm like, I know I've seen that, where I've seen it before. I've seen this sequence before, and it was just 5 chapters away. I saw the same sequence in John chapter 11 with the Resurrection of Lazarus.
Okay.
And so it's one of those things when you see something once, it's kind of cool, but you see something, the same sequence, same pattern again, he's trying to get our attention with it.
Yeah, that's a good Bible study tip. It's not just by accident that you see the same phrase or the same word or whatever. Yes, that's great.
Yeah, so leaning into that, I went back and I always, another Bible study tip, I always read a couple of chapters before and after, just to make sure that I have a full understanding of what's going on. And so I landed there in John chapter 6, with the feeding the multitude. And from that, for the first time, I kind of put myself there in the same position of the disciples, because that was right after John the Baptist was executed.
Yeah, and I'd never put that together. I mean, obviously I read it, but I'd never put that together. That was a good thing to pull out.
Yeah, so I'm putting myself into their shoes, and I think that was probably the first time they realized that, wow, I could actually die for this.
Yeah, this is not a game. This is not just like we'll see where this goes. This is fun hanging out with the rabbi, traveling around.
This is life and death, and I think so getting away, focusing on the why. Why are they getting away? I think it's really to regroup, to refocus, and then all of a sudden here comes the multitude. And I think one of the patterns that I saw, with especially in this, is that our miracles will always show up at a time of inconvenience. Because it was definitely, I don't think that they were in the mindset for ministry. Mm-mm. I mean, you and I can be on I-35. For those that don't know, Austin traffic, I-35 will cost your salvation. But so we can get off I-35, and sometimes we have to sit in the parking lot for a minute just to get mentally focused and ready. And so I don't think that in their mindset was even ready for it. I think that's the reason why Matthew even records, they encourage Jesus to send them away. And so we have a tendency to send off or send away the very inconvenience that contains our miracle.
Send the people away. I love that. I'd actually written that down, that it comes at a time for inconvenience, and like you said, we push away that answer. Something that Dad has actually shared with me, and I've kind of learned, is like, sometimes, especially, and we believe in, the priesthood of the believer, and that all of us are ministers in different ways and stuff. And so sometimes it's those moments that you're like the most tired, and God gives you an opportunity to minister, and it will actually re-energize you, and actually because you're stepping into not only your gift or your talent, but it's like a special grace that God gives. And so it's amazing how you'll get energy and stuff, but it's kind of you have to still have to take that step. It's that one step that you're just like, oh, I do not want to talk to this person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It reminds you, as far as you're the one that said, Lord, use me. You're the one that says that you want to make a difference.
Right. Right.
And so all of a sudden the moment comes for us to make a difference, and we just want to hit the snooze button.
Yep. I love that. It's been said by so many people, but people are always like, God use me, and then he uses them, and they're like, I feel so used. I feel so used.
Yeah, absolutely. And so because of the inconvenience, I think that's one of the stumbling blocks, that as far as we don't want to be inconvened. We have such strict schedules. I mean, you have 2 boys now. So I'm pretty sure there's sleep patterns, and there's times when you got to get, baths done and bedtime and all that. So now, especially in today's culture, there's narrower and times, for ministry is getting so narrow that it's almost an inconvenience. And so that's where, we have to make sure that we can push the inconvenience and to make sure that we're not allowing that to be a stumbling block.
Yeah. I loved what you said. I think it kind of segues. Is you said, I refuse to be the reason I don't get my answer or I get my miracle. And kind of what you talked about, which we're actually recording this before Wednesday night prayer, but we have Wednesday night prayer, and it is difficult to get to. I mean, and that's one thing we've changed the times, and we've tried to help people as much as possible. But in the city we live in, really until 8 o'clock, you're going to be fighting traffic. But we have so many people that do fight to get here, even if they come straight from work or whatever. And there's something about that. I think it shows God that you're hungry, and there's like an expectation. Like it's like I'm not waiting for it to just happen to me. I'm actually gonna make space for God to move in this moment. And that's what you said, like with the constant hurry and hustle and bustle. And we've talked about this, especially at the beginning of COVID. We did a series where we talked about creating that space, creating that Sabbath. Those different times where you actually slow down enough to let God speak to you, to let God minister to you, and not just like, well, I think you said, like 30 seconds in the car before you go and work or something like that. Yeah.
It's I want to make sure that I'm not doing anything that's holding up God's hand. Whether if it's not just finances or in faith, but just my whole existence. Going from start to finish throughout the day. As far as with lack of communication, lack of devotion, just to make sure that I'm not the cause. That I'm not the reason. That it's more. It's not that he's on delay. As far as it's just in his time. You know? And so even with the whole inconvenience, even transition that into Lazarus. I mean, it was pretty inconvenient for Jesus to show up when Lazarus was already dead. I mean, it was like Mary and Martha.
He purposefully waited, which is so weird. He's literally, Jesus wept. The shortest scripture, he's crying, but then he waited. What was, I think 2 or 3 days.
2 days. He waited
2 days.
He waited 2 days, and the disciples kept trying to. I think the disciples were trying to cheer him up, like, "No, I'm sure he's just asleep." And Jesus was like, "No, he's dead."
No,
but then I see him getting kind of angry as far as like, "No, I mean, I'm glad for your sake that I wasn't there." And a lot of that is because they only saw him as a healer. And so for him to get to the tomb and to resurrect Lazarus, I mean, so now they can see him as the resurrection. And so otherwise, how can people identify him as the resurrection if they never seen him do it? And so it was pretty inconvenient for him to show up, at that time. But I think also God will allow things in seasons in our life so he can reveal himself to us in a new way.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of hit on that for a second. I know you have so much, but that inconvenience thing, and I think it can be easy to think about like, oh, God is putting a bad situation in my life, and so because he wants to show me that he's God, and I don't understand, why would God do that? That's so mean. And Lazarus was already sick. He was going to die whether, if Jesus wouldn't have been there, he was going to die anyways. So I think you have to kind of flip that mindset of, and I believe you mentioned this a little bit, but we live in a fallen world. Bad things happen. We get in situations. Maybe we make choices and decisions that put us in bad situations. But what I think it is I think those are the situations where we just get desperate enough to actually believe that God can do it. Because at that point, when a loved one is on their deathbed, when you've gotten the final notice of eviction, or your child's in the hospital sick, which we went through for several months recently, you're like, I can't fix this. I can't work any more hours. I can't smooze anybody. I can't, convince the doctor. And I think that's when we get to the end of ourselves, then we're like, okay, now God. And what if we would just start at that point?
Right.
Instead of having to be forced to like, okay, well, I've tried every other option. Now I'll come to God. What if we just started there?
Yeah, no, and we should start there. Just, I mean, going back to, we live in natural law. The reason why there's earthquakes, floods, and tornadoes. I mean, bad things happen to good people. And a miracle is simply just God overriding or overruling himself, overruling the very laws of nature that he himself created. And I even made the comment as far as, because there's people that actually argue against miracles and argue against the existence of it. And they feel that miracles bound God to from laws of nature, with laws of nature. And I'm like, if an all-powerful God is held bound captive by the laws of nature, then I don't know if I want to serve him.
Right.
And so I definitely think that when we understand that, we can go to him, go to the source, right off the bat, instead of as a last resort. It save us a whole lot of time.
Yeah. That's so good. What next? What was the next part?
So once the disciples saw that they're inconvened, but obviously they're not going to be sent off anywhere. They're like, okay, so where are we going to get some food at? And so
they got voluntold.
They got voluntold, and so it was basically a Lunchable. It was 5 loaves and 2 fish from a little boy.
Yeah.
And they all said, well, how is this going to feed? How is this going to feed the multitude? Because it was 5,000 men, but that's not including the women and children.
Right.
So it could be 10, 12, 14,000 people.
Easily
that.
Large families back then.
Yeah. So on the low side, 12, 14,000 people, and to look at it, it's enough provision for a lunch, for a child,
right?
To say the least. And so a lot of times, and pretty much every time, like when a miracle occurs, it's always going to go against your logic. It's always going to go against what you think should happen.
Yes.
Some people feel like, I've been praying and I need a car, but I feel like God's going to give me a car. That doesn't make any sense. Who's going to give me a car?
Yeah.
So it goes against logic. And even the same thing, even with Lazarus, when he was in the tomb, when Jesus got there, he told Martha to get people to roll the stone away. And Martha's like, you sure? He's been dead for 4 days. He's going to stink.
He stinks.
Yeah, he's going to stink. So a lot of times the very miracle itself, we stand in the way of it because logically, even though it's right, it's 100, and the logic part is correct. It's not possible for 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed 14,000 people. Not possible.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also in logic is 100% correct that yes, a dead body has been in there sealed for 4 days. It's going to stink. So even when logic is right, you have to ignore it. And still push into the fact that God's all powerful, and I can't allow logic stand in between me and my miracle.
Yeah. I thought about when I heard you say that in the sermon. I thought, are you gonna submit yourself to logic, or are you gonna submit yourself to the Lord?
Yeah.
Which one are you gonna
good,
trust? And obviously, I mean, we're big proponents of do the logic to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
Don't just sit around and that story. There's like a story that the man was drowning and he's like, God save me, and a boat came by and he was like, no, God's gonna save me, and then another boat came by and he died and went to heaven. He's like, God, why didn't you save me? And he's like, I sent you all these boats. So there's use your head and logic, but you do have to start to trust that yes, this isn't going to make sense, and that's how you know it takes faith, and that's how you know it's a real miracle. Because if people are like, well, it's something that's like unlikely, but it still could happen just from human chance or luck or whatever. I'm like, maybe God kind of influenced it, but that could have just happened on its own.
Right.
That's not really God intervening. But this was something that was completely impossible. Yeah. And the boy, I always think it's interesting how the boy had to give up his lunch.
Yes.
Well, one, I think it's interesting that nobody else had lunch.
The only one prepared.
Right. The only one prepared is the little boy. And it's like, where are his parents? Because you would think if his parents were there, they would kind of talk through the parents, but they like specifically talk about this little boy. And they're like, hey, kid, give us your food, you know, which I'm sure he was kind of like, okay, I'm going to trust y'all. Like,
especially he's a child, and here's
feel punished for like actually being prepared and bringing your own food.
Yeah, here's fishermen and tax collectors saying, give us your lunch.
Yeah.
You know, or,
grown men.
Yeah. And so the same thing even with Lazarus, as far as when, you know, to remove the stone, or to roll the stone away. You know, I think that's so many people right now, is where, you know, our miracle and our answer is just a stone roll away. But the logic of it, as far as it's a dead dream. You know, that me going back to college and getting a degree, me finding my spouse with kids, you know, that dream of having a family, that died a long time ago. And so the idea of rolling that stone away, you know, even though it goes against your logic, well, there's no one out there for me. You know, it goes against your logic. There's no way I can go back to college at my age with my schedule. What ends up happening is that stone's staying still, and because of it, your dream dies, or stays dead. Rather.
Yeah.
So from that, Jesus gets the bread, he gets the fish, and what I found to be so interesting is because before he feeds, or before he even breaks the bread or multiplies the fish, he gave thanks. And so it's the question of, and he also does it too, just right before he resurrects Lazarus, before he pulls him out of the grave, which I always think is so cool that he was very specific, like Lazarus come forth, because if he was to say, hey, you come out, like the whole graveyard,
everybody comes rolling out.
And but he was very specific, and I think the reason, again, part of this pattern is that he's trying to show us is that, can we be thankful over the little? Even though we're in a season of need, in a season that we need a miraculous touch or a miraculous blessing, can we thank him for the little bit that we do have? You know, can we thank him for, you know, the 5 loaves and 2 fish, even though logic says it's not possible. It's not possible to pay the bills with their current financial situation, but can you thank him for the little bit of spare change you do have?
Right.
You know, and I think that's the biggest reason why we don't see the answers, especially if it's called, you know, say in the finances, is that we don't see that touch, that blessing, is because if we're not going to show gratitude over the little, when that next round of blessings come, who's to say we're going to show gratitude then? You know, and so it's always, you know, give thanks, you know.
Yeah, people are always like, you know, if I won the lottery, I would tithe, you know, 10% to the church. And it's like, well, if you don't tithe 10% on your $300 paycheck, you're definitely not going to tithe $10 million or something like that. So those little things. One thing that I've always found interesting, and I don't know if you hit on this in one of the services, but is how Jesus blessed it, and then he broke the bread. So he actually gave each disciple, actually even had less than the 2 fish and the 5 loaves. So it's like, that's already small, and then he's like, yeah, well, here's even smaller to have faith on, to believe on. And they're like, man, well, Peter, your piece is a little bit bigger than mine. Like, I think you're going to be able to feed more people. I just always think, because you would think that it's like Jesus touches it, and this is when the miracle is going to happen. This is when, and he gives you back less. He gives you back smaller than what you'd even given him.
Yeah. No, so it's just to see that happen, I think, and all of this though too, is that we have to understand that disciples at that time, you know, they weren't Christ, they weren't fully God, fully man, they were fully man. So the same emotions and fears and questions that they went through, I mean, we go through. So I think it's kind of easy for us to put ourselves in that position, because we've been there, where, how am I going to make this stretch? You know, how am I, and it's not just a financial thing, but how can I make my time stretch? How can I be a husband and a father?
You know? My energy, you know, I'm tired all day, and I want to go home and be a good dad, but I'm just exhausted from work, or so many different areas that you can apply that.
Yeah. So, but to be thankful for the moments that you do have, you know, having the gratitude, you know, praying. So I didn't really have a whole lot of time with my family today, but I had some.
Yeah.
You know, and having, like, you know.
Well, I have a family. Like, I have a family to go home to. I have a home to go home to, you know, or at least a room or something. Yeah. You can always find something to be thankful for.
Absolutely. Yeah, actually, because my oldest son, Cohen, he's a freshman in high school, and so it's actually this past Monday. Yesterday we're driving in. Today's Wednesday.
Yeah, it's been a long week.
It's been a long week already. But as we're driving in, because we a lot of times, or sometimes we'll even pray as driving to school, and so as we're driving on Monday, it wasn't really asking God for anything. It was our whole drive in was, everything from thanking him to the truck that we were in, to the house that we have, thanking him that he has a school to go to, and food to eat when he gets there. And I think a lot of times when we get so lost and lonely, or things that we're struggling with, to find those opportunities, just take a quick inventory. And thank him for different things you have in your life, and all of a sudden you realize that you have a whole lot more going on for you than what you realize.
Yeah. It's one. I feel like it's one of those things that it's hard to get started, but then like if you're making a list, then it just starts flowing. You're like, well, I have this thing and this person, and I've heard before, and this is it's interesting to me where when people that are not Christians, not believers, take really biblical concepts, and it still works because it's truth. We've talked about that recently. Truth is truth. But I've heard people even mentioning that aren't believers. Starting like in the morning, kind of before you get going. For me, I have to have my coffee and stuff probably first, and then like your lunch break. Maybe you had a bad first half of your day, and you're just like, this job and this, and just but I'm thankful this job provides for me, and this and that, and then maybe before you go to sleep. And so just at different moments throughout your day, even if it's just 2 or 3 things,
right,
it changes you. It literally does something in your brain chemistry to encourage you.
Oh, 100%. And once we're, because obviously the miracle took place after the blessing, after the gratitude. And lastly, I think this is where also though we kind of miss it, is that he wants us to participate. Just like it was the boy who gave the lunch, and the disciples were told, hey, get some baskets and collect. And I always find it's kind of like, I always question as far as like, why were there baskets? Who just walks around with baskets from IKEA? Who does that? But then I remember that's how they traveled back then. They put all their goods in their blankets or house cat or whatever it is. They travel around with these baskets,
and they were pretty far out. Like this wasn't just an easy. This was maybe a half a day walk or something like that.
It's a journey. So, but what I thought was so intriguing is the fact that the owners of the basket, and I didn't talk about this at all. It hit me. I'm like, man, like one of those things. Like you say, like, you drive like, man, I wish I would preach that. But it was because I was thinking about that afterwards, and I was asking myself, why do they empty those out? And the only conclusion I came up with is that they would rather empty out all that they have to make room and collect what God had for them. It was way more important for them. Can I go back and redo this?
That's good. So, I did the same thing this past Sunday, so I'll tell you later. I was like, that was just that would have been 10 times better if I would have.
It was more important for those the 12 owners of the baskets, of the 12 people, whatever. But it was more important for them to get rid of, empty out what they had, to receive whatever Christ had for him,
to make space
for it. Yeah. And so, and this is the same. So they participated, with the loaves, the fish, with the boys' lunch. They participated in collecting it up. And it's also the same with Lazarus, where it wasn't just the people that helped roll the stone away, but then Christ also said, hey, I need some people to go and unwrap him from his grave clothes. So he doesn't he'll do all the heavy lifting, but he wants us to participate.
Yeah.
He wants us to get the lunch. He wants us to unwrap the grave clothes. And I think this other reason why is that we don't see our miracles as assembly block is because we kind of sit idle. We're not being participants of it.
Yeah, like I've seen, many times, like someone get healed in a prayer line, especially with Dad, and maybe they have a blown out knee, or especially if someone maybe has been paralyzed and their legs and muscles have atrophied. He's like, hey, yes, we can tell that God healed you, but you still got to grow those muscles. You need to do some physical therapy. You need to practice some air squats or whatever. Or you could end up in the same situation if you don't end up using it. And you can apply that to, I know you talked about a job situation, but say God miraculously provides for the job. Well, you still got to show up and work at the job.
You still got to show up, yeah. Yeah, you still got to show up. And I think part of that too, I think also participating in the miracle is telling people about it.
That's good.
Because a lot of times the question is, okay, why does God do a miracle? And it's not for his own ego. and it's not for any self gain other than for his name to be known. Because after both feeding of the multitude and with Lazarus, there was a whole new revelation. People with sort of Lazarus, they looked at him like, oh, they've believed in him from that point. And now the revelation of him being the resurrection, set in. And then the same thing with the feeding of the multitude. The very next verse, it talks about, and now they believe that he was, that they not only they believed in him, but he was the one. And so it always brings a whole new sense of not just revelation, but I think a lot of times we'll get that miracle and then we don't really tell anybody about it. Almost like, well, that thing happened to me 5-10 years ago. That but miracles don't have expiration dates. Testimonies don't.
Yeah. And I think that's how you continue to, it says, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. So the next time you come to a situation where you need a miracle, where you need something supernatural to happen, you tell yourself, and even maybe if your family's involved or if your friend, I know God can do this because he already did this for me. He already went back. So you're again bringing up that gratitude, but you're almost kind of reminding yourself, I've already been through this. I've already felt that's not logical. I've already felt the fear of what if it does happen, but I know that it can and it will if I have faith.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so that whole pattern, those four things are basically, I would just like to as not just stumbling blocks, but it's when we
maybe just go through the pattern really quick, just bullet point like each one, so we know the pattern.
It's just that it's always going to come at a moment of inconvenience, so just always be aware of your time, surroundings, be aware that when you're praying for something, if you're praying for a miracle, get ready to be inconvened. Yeah, I think it's kind of like the Cliff Note version. Just, if you want a miracle, get ready to be inconvened. It's always going to go against your logic. A big miracle isn't, your miracle is not going to be 2 + 2 = 4. It's going to be 2 + 2 = 74, and you have no idea how it's going to work out. But we don't do math on our own. We do it with God's math, and God's math never uses a calculator.
Totally.
And so after that, it's always going to, before we have to make sure we give thanks. There's always going to be a season of gratitude. Thanking Him over the little. Even I made the comment as far as you need a healing in your left knee. Your left knee hurts really bad. Well, thank Him for your right one that doesn't hurt. As far as
it's true.
Thinking that you still have a knee. Kind of a thing. And then lastly, participate in it. Participate in the miracle. And like those sequence of events, those patterns. It wasn't just found there at the feeding of the multitude, but also there at the tomb with Lazarus. And it's for me, it was like a spoke out that Christ was trying to say something as far as, hey, here's a sequence of, if you want to see the impossible become possible in your life, follow these steps.
Yeah, and just expect them. I think, like you said, kind of looking at it is if it's like a stumbling block. Well, if you know the stumbling block's there, you can step over it. So if you think ahead of time, if you know ahead of time, we try to encourage people with that when they're praying for something, or like even when we're fasting, we're like, hey, this is gonna happen. You're gonna feel this way. It's gonna happen every time. So I think that's really encouraging. I think it was a great word. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Your first time. Hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We'll definitely have you back soon as you preach again.
Just make sure that I get the memo so we can match and wear the same.
Yes. Maybe we'll switch it up and do a blue shirt next time or something. But thank you guys so much for watching. As always, we would love to hear from you. If you would comment on this video or leave us a review on all of the podcast platforms, we would love to get some feedback from you. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button. It really encourages us, but also helps this video get out to more people. And our whole point here, our whole reason for doing this, we're not really getting anything out of this. It's just to encourage people to build up the kingdom of God and hopefully help someone get a miracle in their life. So again, thank you so much. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.